On a cold and desolate night, a woman is saved from an accident by a stranger. But what seemed like a simple act of kindness revealed a surprising secret that would change their lives forever. Nora pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as she looked out the window of her apartment. The city was covered in a thick layer of snow, and the wind howled outside, making the cold feel even more biting. It was the coldest day of the year according to weather forecasts, and she felt every negative degree in her bones. At 40, Nora worked as an editor at a local magazine, dealing with tight deadlines and constant article revisions. The newsroom was hectic, with writers submitting last-minute pieces and her ensuring everything was perfect before publication. The day had been especially tiring with a special winter edition about to be released. Today, however, she had planned something different. She decided to visit her parents before heading home. It was a visit she made regularly, especially during the colder months, to ensure they were well and warm. Her parents lived in a modest house in the suburbs, and Nora enjoyed spending time with them, especially when the weather was so unforgiving. She put on her heavy coat, slipped her hands into gloves, and ventured out into the freezing wind. The streets were relatively deserted, with few people daring to venture outside in such weather. Snowflakes fell silently, covering everything in a pure white blanket. The walk to her parents' house wasn't long, but with the high snow, every step felt like a monumental effort. As she walked, Nora thought about her week. The work deadlines, the articles that needed revising, and how she was looking forward to the upcoming days off. Arriving at her parents' house, Nora brushed the snow off her boots before entering. She was greeted with warm hugs and the comforting smell of hot soup. "It's so cold outside," Nora said, taking off her coat and cozying up on the couch. "We know, dear. It's the harshest winter we've had in years," her mother replied, bringing her a cup of hot tea. They spent the afternoon talking, reminiscing, and discussing recent events. Although there were moments of laughter, there was also a certain melancholy in the air, typical of family gatherings on winter days. As the afternoon drew to a close, Nora decided it was time to head home. The sky was starting to darken, and the temperature was dropping even further. "I'll walk back," she said when her parents suggested she stay for dinner. With the snow so high, it's safer than driving. Saying goodbye to her parents, Nora put on her coat and scarf again, preparing to face the cold. "Take care," she said as she opened the door. "I'll visit you again soon." With that, she left, determined to get home safely despite the unforgiving weather. Little did she know, fate was about to intervene in a way that would change her life forever. The icy wind cut across Nora's face as she walked back home. The streets were deserted, and the sound of her footsteps in the snow was the only thing breaking the night's silence. The lights in the houses were on, and she could see families gathered around fireplaces seeking warmth and comfort. Nora quickened her pace, eager to reach her apartment and escape the intense cold. As she crossed a narrow street, she heard a sudden noise. She looked around, trying to identify the source of the sound, but her vision was limited by the dense falling snow. Without warning, a car careened around the corner, sliding dangerously across the ice-covered street. Nora froze in fear, unable to move as the vehicle sped toward her. Her thoughts jumbled, and she knew she had no time to escape. Suddenly, she felt a strong pull on her arm, yanking her out of the car's path. She fell into the snow, disoriented, as the vehicle sped past where she had been standing moments before, crashing into a nearby post. Nora looked up and saw a disheveled, bearded man looking at her with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse from the cold. Nora tried to respond, but her voice failed her. She just nodded, still in shock from what had just happened. The man crouched down, extending his hand to help her up. "Come on, you can't stay here," he said, helping her to her feet. "Thank you. You saved me," she finally managed to say, her voice trembling. "Just in time. Let's get out of here before something else happens," he replied, looking around nervously. They approached the car to check on the driver, who seemed conscious but in shock. "Are you all right?" Nora asked the driver, who nodded, looking dazed. "I'll call for help," Nora said, taking her phone out of her pocket and dialing emergency services. After ensuring the driver was being assisted, they moved away from the accident scene. Nora noticed the man was shivering from the cold. His coat was in tatters, and he seemed ill-equipped to face the harsh weather. She felt a wave of compassion and gratitude for him. Do you want to come with me? You can warm up at my place, take a hot shower, eat something." He hesitated, distrust evident in his eyes. "Why are you helping me like this?" he asked, his voice laden with skepticism. "Because you saved me," Nora replied sincerely. "It's the least I can do after what you did for me. It's too cold for you to stay outside." After a moment of reflection, he nodded. "All right. Thank you." "What's your name?" she asked as they began walking together. "Jack," he replied with a weak smile. "And yours?" "Nora," she answered. Hearing her name, Jack had a noticeable reaction of pain, placing his hand on his head as if suffering a sudden headache. "Are you all right?" Nora asked, concerned. "Yes, I'm fine. It must be the cold or just a headache," he replied, trying to hide his discomfort. As they walked towards the subway, the snow continued to fall, creating a quiet and serene landscape. Nora and Jack walked side by side, trying to keep warm as they talked. "Weren't you afraid of me?" Jack asked, at that moment. "Not at all," Nora replied, almost laughing. "I've met many homeless people through volunteer work. I understand your situation and would never be afraid of you." Jack's reaction was a mix of curiosity and excitement. "Volunteer work?" he said. "And have you been doing this for a long time?" Nora smiled, looking ahead. "I've always felt a responsibility to help others. I started volunteering in my spare time, distributing meals to the homeless and helping in shelters. It's something that brings me a lot of satisfaction." "That's admirable," Jack replied, his voice filled with respect. "Not many people care enough to do something like that." "I believe we can all make a difference, even a small one," said Nora. "And you, Jack? How long have you been on the streets?" Jack sighed, looking thoughtful. "To be honest, I don't remember. I've lost count of the years. My memory is a bit fuzzy. There are many things I can't remember clearly." Nora looked at him with concern. "You don't remember anything about your past?" "Not much," admitted Jack. "I remember fragments, but nothing concrete. It's like there's a big void." The conversation continued as they walked, with Jack sharing more about his experiences on the streets and how difficult it was to survive in the winter. Nora listened attentively, feeling a deep sadness for his situation. "Have you tried seeking help to recover your memories?" Nora asked. "Yes," Jack replied, shaking his head. "But it's hard when you don't have a fixed place. Also, people on the streets are often not taken seriously." Nora nodded, understanding the difficulty. "Well, I hope we can change that. Who knows, maybe with a bit of stability, your memories might come back." When they arrived at the subway station, Nora and Jack found an empty bench and sat down, waiting for the next train. The station was almost deserted, the silence only interrupted by the distant sound of the wind and the occasional footsteps of other passengers. Jack looked around, visibly uncomfortable in an environment so different from what he was used to. "I always get nervous in enclosed spaces," he admitted, rubbing his hands to keep warm. "I understand," Nora said, trying to reassure him. "How long have you been living on the streets, Jack?" "Years," he replied with a sigh. "I don't know exactly how many. Everything blends together. I have some vague memories from before, but nothing concrete. It's like my life started and ended on the streets." "That must be very difficult," Nora commented, her voice full of empathy. You said you have fragments of memories, Nora continued, trying to understand better. Do any of them give you a clue about who you were? Jack sighed, rubbing his temple again. Sometimes I get flashes of places or faces, but nothing concrete. It's frustrating, like trying to solve a puzzle without all the pieces. Nora placed a gentle hand on his arm. I hope that with time you can piece that puzzle together. Maybe today is the start of that. Jack looked at her, surprised by the kindness and determination in her words. Maybe, he said, allowing himself a small smile. The sound of the approaching train interrupted their conversation. Nora and Jack stood up and prepared to board. The cold of the station contrasted with the warmth that was beginning to grow between them, not just physically but also emotionally as they got to know each other better. On the train, Nora and Jack sat side by side, continuing their conversation as the carriage swayed gently along the tracks. The ride was relatively short, but offered a moment of tranquility for both. Nora decided to share a bit more about herself. My parents have lived in the same house for over 30 years, she said, looking out the fogged-up window. They're my anchor. They've always supported me in everything, even when life got tough. Jack nodded, curious. Do you have siblings? Nora hesitated for a moment, but decided to continue. I had a younger brother, she said softly, but he's gone. It was a very hard blow for our family. I still think about him a lot. That must have been very difficult, Jack commented, his voice gentle. It was and still is, Nora said with a sigh. But life goes on. I hope one day we can find some peace with it. As they talked, an elderly lady sitting in front of them dropped her purse. Without hesitation, Jack quickly stood up and picked it up, handing it back to her with a smile. Thank you so much, young man, the lady said, smiling back. It's rare to see someone so kind these days. Jack nodded and returned to his seat next to Nora. Just doing what I can, he said humbly. However, not everyone on the train seemed to appreciate Jack's presence. A well-dressed man looked at him with disdain, muttering something about beggars under his breath. Nora noticed the tension and placed a comforting hand on Jack's arm. Don't mind him, she said softly. He doesn't know you. Jack smiled gratefully. I'm used to it, but thank you for standing by me. You deserve respect just like anyone else, Nora replied firmly. The train began to slow down as it approached the station where Nora lived. We're almost there, she said. Let's go to my apartment, and you can finally relax a bit. When the train finally stopped at the station, Nora and Jack got off, walking together through the snow-covered streets to the building where she lived. Jack couldn't hide his anxiety, and Nora, noticing this, tried to reassure him with gentle words. As soon as they entered the building, Nora guided him to her apartment. Opening the door, she invited Jack to enter first. He hesitated for a moment, but then took the first step. Crossing the threshold, he was enveloped by an indescribable sensation. It was as if he were entering a completely new world, a world of comfort and warmth he had only dreamed of. The warm air of the apartment enveloped him, contrasting sharply with the biting cold outside. Jack looked around, absorbing every detail. The cozy furniture, the family photos on the walls, the lingering smell of soup from the last time Nora cooked. He felt a deep and unexpected joy, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. You can sit down, Nora said gently, pointing to the sofa. I'll get some of my dad's clothes. They should fit you. And also a razor. While you take a shower, I'll prepare some hot soup. Jack nodded, unable to find words. He sat on the sofa, sinking into the soft upholstery. The last time he had sat in something so comfortable was a distant memory. He allowed himself to relax for a moment, feeling the warmth of the environment seep into his frozen bones. While he waited, his thoughts ran free. Gratitude for Nora flooded him, mixed with a pang of sadness for the memories he couldn't recover. He had never known if he would survive each cold night on the streets, but now he was here, in a safe place, with someone who seemed to genuinely care about him. Nora returned with a pile of clothes, towels, and a razor. "Here you go," she said, handing the items to Jack. "The bathroom is over there," she pointed. "Take your time. I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." "Thank you, Nora," Jack said, feeling a wave of emotion as he spoke her name. He got up, carrying the clothes and towels, and headed to the bathroom. Closing the door behind him, he looked in the mirror. He saw a tired and aged face from the hardships, but also a spark of hope in his own eyes. As the hot water ran over his skin, Jack felt the dirt and despair of the years on the streets begin to dissolve. He shaved off his beard, revealing a face he barely recognized. Each movement was a reminder of what it meant to be human, to be cared for, to be valued. In the kitchen, Nora prepared the soup, her thoughts occupied with the strange sense of familiarity she felt towards Jack. Something about him made her think of her lost brother, but she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on helping the man who had saved her life. She wondered what Jack's life had been like, living without memories, not knowing who he really was. She felt a deep compassion for him and a growing determination to do whatever she could to help him find some comfort and dignity. When Jack emerged from the bathroom, clean-shaven and dressed in Nora's father's clothes, he looked like a different person. "I wanted to thank you again," and when Nora saw him, she was in shock. The plate she had just taken from the cupboard simply fell from her hand and shattered on the floor. Her expression was a mix of horror and confusion, her wide eyes filling with tears. After a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, Nora stammered. "Brandon," she said, still stunned. Jack, now Brandon, felt a whirlwind of emotions as he embraced Nora. The memories began to piece together slowly, like parts of a long-lost puzzle. He pulled back slightly to look at his sister's face, feeling a mixture of joy and disbelief. I remember," he said, his voice trembling. "You're my sister. I'm Brandon." Nora sobbed, trying to control her tears. "I knew you were alive. I always knew. But how? How did this happen?" Brandon shook his head, confused. "I don't know. Everything is so confusing. I remember being lost, wandering aimlessly. Then everything went dark." Nora pulled him closer, still trying to process the reality of their reunion. "Let me see something," she said, lifting the sleeve on Brandon's shoulder. There was the scar, exactly as she remembered. "It's you," she repeated, smiling through her tears. "You're back." They stayed silent for a moment, just appreciating each other's presence. Finally, Nora spoke. "Let's clean this up," she said, looking at the broken plate. "Then we can eat and talk?" Brandon nodded, helping Nora pick up the shards from the floor. The simple task of cleaning up the glass felt surreal, as if they were sharing a dream. When they finished, Nora served the soup, and they sat at the table. "Tell me everything," said Nora, eager to know more. "How was your life all these years?" Brandon sighed, trying to organize his thoughts. "It was hard. I remember always being hungry, cold, trying to survive. People treated me like I was invisible or worse. But there were moments of kindness, like when someone gave me food or a place to sleep." Nora held his hand, feeling deep sorrow for what he had endured. "I'm so sorry, Brandon. I'm sorry for everything." "It's not your fault," said Brandon, squeezing her hand. "But I'm glad to finally have found you. Maybe now I can start to recover who I was." They continued talking, sharing stories, and rebuilding their lost bond. The hot soup and cozy environment brought a sense of normalcy, a glimpse of what could be a new beginning for both of them. The next morning, Nora woke up with a new purpose. She wanted her parents to experience the same joy she felt when reuniting with Brandon. Determined to make a surprise, Nora planned to take him for a haircut and buy new clothes, preparing him for the reunion. "Let's go out today," she said while serving breakfast. "I want to get you ready to surprise our parents." Brandon smiled, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. "I can't wait to see them." After breakfast, Nora and Brandon headed to a local barbershop. As they walked, they talked more about the past and present. "So, have you had any new memories since yesterday?" Nora asked. Brandon thought for a moment. "Some small things. I remember once when we were at the park and you fell off your bike. I helped you up and you were crying a lot. But then we started laughing." Nora smiled, remembering that day. "It was one of our best days. You always made me laugh, even when I was hurt." They entered the barber shop, where a friendly barber greeted them. "Let's get this hair sorted out," said the barber, smiling at Brandon. "Sit here." As Brandon sat down, Nora stood by, watching the transformation. The barber began working, cutting, and styling Brandon's hair, who slowly started to look more like the man Nora remembered. "Do you remember anything else?" Nora asked, curious. Brandon shook his head. "Not much yet. Some memories come and go, but there's still a void. I know it will take time." "Yes," Nora agreed. "And we're here to help with that. The important thing is that we're together again." After the haircut, they went to a clothing store. Nora helped Brandon pick out some new clothes, ensuring he was comfortable and well-dressed for the surprise. As they tried on clothes, they continued talking. "Do you have any fears about reuniting with our parents?" Nora asked. "A little," admitted Brandon. "I don't know how they'll react. I'm afraid I might not be the person they remember." "They will love you," said Nora, holding his hand. "You will always be there, Brandon, no matter what happened." With new clothes and a fresh haircut, Brandon felt like a new person. As they walked back to Nora's apartment, he found himself smiling, eager for what was to come. "I'm ready," he said, determined. "Let's give them the best surprise ever." Nora smiled, feeling grateful for this moment. "Yes, let's. It will be unforgettable." Brandon realized that the path to his parents' house was exactly the reverse of what they took the day before. The short walk to the subway, the station, the train, and the walk to where the car accident occurred. It was the same path, the same cold, the same snow, the same biting wind, and the same hurried people passing by without caring. But at the same time, everything was different. That path had a different meaning now, and he was walking it not as a homeless person but to reclaim the years taken from him. Nora held his hand firmly, smiling encouragingly. "It will all be all right," she said as they walked through the snow-covered streets. Brandon nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. A few blocks from their parents' house, Nora stopped at a bakery. "Wait here," she said, quickly going inside. Brandon looked at the window, vaguely remembering the blueberry muffins their family loved. Shortly after, Nora came out with a box full of fresh muffins. "Your favorite dessert," she said with a smile. "They'll love it." They continued walking, Brandon's heart beating faster with each step. When they finally reached their parents' house, Nora squeezed his hand one last time before letting go. "Ready?" Brandon took a deep breath and nodded. "I am." Nora rang the doorbell, and they heard footsteps coming from inside the house. The door slowly opened, revealing their mother, Vivian. She froze for a moment, looking at Brandon as if seeing a ghost. "Brandon," she said, her voice trembling. Tears began to roll down her face as she stepped forward to hug him. "My God, it's really you?" Brandon hugged his mother, feeling the warmth and love he had missed so much. "It's me, Mom. I'm back." Vivian sobbed with joy, holding him as if she would never let go again. "We thought we had lost you forever," she said, her voice muffled against his chest. Their father, Thomas, appeared at the door, drawn by the sound. He stopped, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Brandon?" "Dad," said Brandon, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm back." Thomas approached slowly, his eyes filled with tears. He hugged his son tightly, feeling the weight of years of worry and pain dissolve. "You're here," he whispered. "You're really here." Nora watched the scene with tears in her eyes, feeling deep joy seeing her family reunited again. "We're all together," she said, holding the box of muffins. "Let's go inside and celebrate." Inside the house, the atmosphere was pure happiness. Vivian couldn't stop looking at Brandon, touching his face as if to confirm he was real. Thomas was visibly emotional, hugging Nora and Brandon repeatedly. Sitting at the table, Nora served the muffins, and they began to talk. Brandon told them what little he remembered of his life on the streets, and his parents listened attentively, crying and laughing together. Vivian held his hand as if afraid he might disappear again. "I always knew we would reunite one day," said Vivian, wiping away her tears. "I never lost hope." "We're so happy you're back," said Thomas, his voice filled with emotion. "No matter what happened, the important thing is that we're together now." Brandon felt a deep warmth in his heart, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. "Thank you for never giving up on me," he said, his voice trembling. "I promise I will do everything to make up for the lost time." They spent the afternoon together, reminiscing about old stories and making new plans for the future. The house was filled with laughter and love, and Brandon felt he had finally found his way home. The next morning, while having breakfast together, Vivian noticed that Brandon was restless. "Is everything all right, dear?" she asked with a concerned look. Brandon sighed, stirring his coffee. "I'm still adjusting to all of this. It's strange being back and trying to live a normal life. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." Thomas, who was reading the newspaper, set it aside and looked at his son. "It's normal to feel that way, Brandon, but you belong here with us, and we'll support you every step of the way." Nora then suggested they spend some time together to help Brandon relax. "Let's go for a walk in the park," she said. "It was one of our favorite places when we were kids. Maybe it will help bring back some good memories." In the park, as they walked along the paths covered with dry leaves, Brandon began to feel a bit more at ease. He remembered some of the games he and Nora used to play, and they laughed together, reminiscing about old times. "Do you remember how we used to chase the ducks?" Nora asked, laughing. Brandon smiled. "I do. And how you always fell in the mud." They had a pleasant time together, and Brandon started to feel like he was regaining part of his old life. As the days passed, he also began to feel more comfortable and confident in his new routine, surrounded by the love and support of his family. At home, the family bonds grew stronger. Vivian and Thomas were always ready to listen and support, and Nora was a constant presence, filling the house with laughter and optimism. One night, as they sat in the living room, Brandon looked around and felt a wave of gratitude. "I know there's still a long way to go," he said, "but I'm happy to be here with you." Vivian smiled, wiping away a tear. "We're happy to have you back, Brandon, and we'll face everything together." The following days were a period of recovery and rediscovery for Brandon. He stayed with his parents, Vivian and Thomas, who provided the love and support necessary to overcome the years of hardship. Nora visited almost every day at first, always bringing her cheerful and encouraging spirit. Brandon underwent a series of medical exams, which revealed that despite the adversities he had faced, his health was relatively stable. He started therapy, which proved to be crucial for recovering important parts of his memory. The therapist, specializing in trauma and amnesia, helped Brandon navigate the complex emotions and memories that resurfaced. Over time, he managed to remember significant fragments of his past, like happy moments with his family and the painful experience that led him to the streets. Although not all memories returned, He felt a great deal of progress and a sense of relief. Determined to restart his life, Brandon found a job at a small local bookstore. Working among books provided him with a sense of peace and normalcy. He dedicated himself diligently, feeling grateful for each day of stability. Meanwhile, Nora decided to share the incredible story of her reunion with her brother. She wrote a moving article for the magazine where she worked, detailing Brandon's journey from disappearance to the miracle of their reunion. The story touched the hearts of many readers, generating a wave of support and solidarity. "Brandon," said Nora one morning as they had coffee together at their parents' house, "I've received so many messages from people moved by our story. It seems that, in some way, we've managed to bring hope to other families too." Brandon lowered his head, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. "I wish everyone could have the happy ending we had. I want to do something to help." Over time, Brandon and Nora decided they wanted to do more than just share their story. Inspired by Brandon's own experience on the streets, they began actively participating in local charity efforts, helping other homeless individuals find shelter, food, and hope. They became regular volunteers at shelters and rehabilitation centers, offering not only their time but also their understanding and compassion. Brandon shared his story with those still struggling, showing them that recovery and redemption were possible. "I know what it's like to feel invisible," he would tell the homeless. "But you're not alone. There are people who care and want to help." Nora, for her part, used her writing skills to raise awareness about the homeless crisis, publishing articles and organizing fundraising campaigns. Together, they formed a powerful team, driven by the desire to make a difference. Eventually, Brandon and Nora decided it was time to take a step further. With the support of their family and community, they founded their own charity initiative, an organization dedicated to helping those with no place to call home. The shelter offered refuge, food, medical services, and most importantly, a second chance. The center was named Refuge of Hope, symbolizing the new beginning that Brandon and so many others had found. Nora became the communications director, while Brandon took on the role of activity coordinator, always alongside the volunteers and those seeking help. One cold winter afternoon, similar to the one when Brandon was saved by Nora, he looked at the center filled with people receiving support and felt a profound sense of purpose. "We did it, Nora," he said, watching with satisfaction the work they had built together. "We're making a difference." Nora smiled, hugging her brother warmly. "Yes, we did. And we'll keep going, one step at a time." Brandon and Nora's story was not just about a miraculous reunion, but about the strength of love and hope. Together, they turned pain into purpose, bringing light and hope to many still in darkness. And so, the cycle of compassion and help continued, warming hearts and changing lives one day at a time.